1945, after a terrible world war had finally ended, the Korean peninsula found itself caught between two giants. For 35 years, Korea had suffered under Japanese rule. Now, as the Japanese Empire crumbled, Soviet soldiers marched in from the north, while American forces arrived from the south. On a map in a conference room far away, two military officers drew a line. They chose the 38th parallel, an arbitrary line of latitude, as a temporary boundary. Soviet forces would accept Japanese surrender north of the line. Americans would take the south. It was meant to be temporary. 4 years had passed. The temporary line had become a wall between two nations. In the north, Kim Il-sung had built a government backed by the Soviet Union. In the south, Syngman Rhee led a government supported by the United States. Kim Il-sung stood by his window, hands clasped behind his back. His assistant, a young officer named Park, entered quietly.
The latest reports from the south, sir.
Kim Il-sung turned, his eyes bright with conviction.
Our people remain divided, families split by an imaginary line. This cannot stand, Pak. Korea must be one again.
But the Americans and Premier Stalin has advised patience.
Meanwhile, hundreds of miles south in Seoul, Syngman Rhee faced his own frustrations. He sat in a meeting room with American advisors, his jaw tight.
The communists grow stronger every day. We need more American support. Weapons, soldiers, commitment.
An American advisor, Colonel Morrison, shifted uncomfortably.
Mr. President, Washington believes the Korean situation is stabilizing. Resources are needed elsewhere.
Rhee slammed his hand on the table.
Stabilizing? While Kim Il-sung plots invasion. We are abandoned.
Winter came. Kim Il-sung traveled to Moscow, carrying his boldest request yet. In Stalin's office, with snow falling outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, the North Korean leader made his case.
Comrade Stalin, the Korean people cry out for reunification. The South is weak. Rhee is unpopular. With your blessing, we could liberate the peninsula in weeks.
Stalin puffed slowly on his pipe, studying the younger man with calculating eyes.
And what of the Americans? They will not simply watch.
The Americans are withdrawing from Asia. They have shown no commitment to defend South Korea. It will be quick. Too quick for intervention.
Stalin's eyes narrowed behind his pipe smoke.
I will consider this. But you must be certain, Comrade Kim. Absolutely certain.
Then, in January 1950, something happened that would change everything. In Washington, D.C., U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson stood before a room full of reporters. Behind him hung a map of Asia. He spoke with practiced confidence about America's defensive perimeter in the Pacific. Our defensive line runs from the Aleutians to Japan, through the Ryukyu Islands to the Philippines. This represents America's commitment to Pacific security. A reporter raised her hand.
Mr. Secretary, that line doesn't include Korea or Taiwan. Does this mean?
It means our primary defensive commitments lie along the island chain. Other areas would fall to the United Nations and regional security. In Moscow, Stalin read the transcript of Acheson's speech. A thin smile crossed his face. His advisor, Molotov, stood nearby.
The Americans have drawn their line. Korea is outside it.
He reached for his telephone.
Send word to Comrade Kim. Tell him I have reconsidered his proposal.
But there was one more leader whose support Kim Il-sung needed. In Beijing, Mao Zedong listened as a Soviet envoy explained the plan. The Chinese leader stroked his chin thoughtfully, staring at a map showing how close Korea was to China's border.
If Kim fails, the Americans will be at our doorstep. This is a great risk.
Comrade Stalin believes success is certain, but he wishes to know, if needed, would China provide support?
Mao was silent for a long moment. Outside, rain began to fall.
Tell Comrade Stalin, China will not abandon our Korean comrades. But tell Comrade Kim, make it swift.
Through the spring of 1950, secret plans took shape. In Moscow, Soviet generals helped Kim Il-sung prepare. They studied maps, calculated troop movements, planned supply lines. The Soviet general pointed to Seoul on the map.
3 days to Seoul, 2 weeks to Busan. The South Korean army is poorly equipped. They will crumble.
Kim Il-sung nodded eagerly.
And the Americans?
Will arrive too late. By then, Korea will be unified under your leadership, presented to the world as a fait accompli.
But along the 38th parallel, ordinary Koreans knew nothing of these plans. Children played by streams. Farmers tended rice paddies. Families shared meals in homes that had stood for generations. A young girl named Minji chased her brother across a wooden bridge.
You can't catch me.
Her grandmother called from the house.
Children, come eat. Your father will be home soon.
Minji stopped at the bridge's edge, looking north toward mountains she'd never crossed. Her brother Tai joined her.
Grandmother says we used to visit cousins up there, before the line. Why can't we anymore?
Tai shrugged. Neither child could understand why a line drawn on a map should keep families apart. In Washington, President Harry Truman reviewed intelligence reports from Korea. His military advisors had assured him the situation was stable. Most American troops had withdrawn from South Korea. The focus was on Europe, on rebuilding Japan, on containing communism where it really mattered. His secretary knocked gently.
Mr. President, your 4 o'clock is here.
Truman set down the Korea file. He had no idea that within days, the distant peninsula would demand his full attention.
Send them in.
June 25th, 1950, 4 a.m. Along the 38th parallel, thousands of North Korean soldiers waited in the pre-dawn darkness. Tank engines idled quietly. Artillery pieces stood ready. Officers checked their watches. Kim Il-sung's voice crackled over field radios.
Today, we liberate our brothers and sisters. Today, Korea becomes one. Advance.
The artillery opened fire. Thunder rolled across the peaceful hills. Tanks surged forward. The war had begun. South Korean forces, caught completely by surprise, scrambled to respond. At a border outpost, a South Korean officer grabbed his radio.
Command. Command. We're under massive attack. Tanks, artillery, thousands of...
The radio went dead. An explosion rocked the building. By afternoon, news of the invasion had reached the United Nations in New York. The Security Council convened an emergency session. Delegates took their seats. British, French, Chinese, American. The Soviet seat sat empty. The Soviets were boycotting the UN over a different issue entirely, the question of which Chinese government should hold China's seat. It was a protest over Taiwan. They had no idea that their absence would prove catastrophic to their Korean plans. The American delegate stood.
The unprovoked invasion of the Republic of Korea represents a clear breach of international peace. Without Soviet veto power present, I move that we authorize member nations to provide military assistance to South Korea.
The vote was called. Without the Soviet Union present to veto it, the resolution passed. What Kim Il-sung and Stalin had planned as a quick regional victory was now authorized as a United Nations military action. That same evening, President Truman met with his advisors. Maps of Korea covered the table. His military chiefs presented the grim situation.
Mr. President, South Korean forces are in full retreat. Without immediate intervention, the entire peninsula will fall within weeks.
Dean Acheson leaned forward, his face pale. This is partially my fault, Mr. President. My speech. Stalin must have interpreted it as a green light. Truman was silent for a moment. He remembered the 1930s. How the world's democracies had appeased Hitler, had allowed aggression to go unchallenged until it was too late.
We can't let this stand. If we allow communism to take Korea through naked aggression, where does it stop? Taiwan? The Philippines? Europe again?
He stood up, his jaw set.
Commit American forces. Air and naval support immediately. Ground troops to follow. We draw the line here.
Within days, American forces began arriving in Korea. But they arrived to find chaos. South Korean forces in retreat, roads clogged with refugees, cities burning. On a muddy road heading south, Minji held her little brother's hand tightly. Rain poured down. Their grandmother struggled along beside them, carrying a small bundle of possessions.
Grandmother, where is father? Where are we going?
South, child. Away from the fighting. Your father. He stayed to help the soldiers.
Ta looked back north toward their village, now lost in the mist.
Will we ever go home?
His grandmother had no answer. The conflict that Kim Il-sung had promised would take weeks stretched into months, then years. What Stalin had seen as a quick opportunity became a bloody stalemate. China sent hundreds of thousands of troops when American forces pushed north. The war that began with one man's ambition and another man's miscalculation grew into something none of them had imagined. A conflict that would claim millions of lives and leave Korea more divided than ever. 3 years later, in 1953, the guns finally fell silent. An armistice was signed. But it was not peace, just a pause. The 38th parallel remained, now fortified with barbed wire, guard towers and landmines. On the northern side, a young boy looked south toward mountains he'd never climbed. On the southern side, a young girl looked north toward cousins she'd never met. They were the same people, speaking the same language, sharing the same ancestors, but a line on a map, drawn in haste, hardened in blood, kept them apart.
Someday.
Someday we'll be one Korea again.
But that day has not yet come. The Korean War lasted 3 years. Over 3 million people died. Soldiers